Lugard, at some point said he wanted to do the reform of the legal system in colonial Nigeria and created new courts. And part of what he did, and which people in southern Nigeria resisted, Professor Moni Adewoye has written about this, was to say that these courts, I think they were called provincial courts if my memory serves me correctly, lawyers would not be allowed to practice in them. How do you have courts from which you bar lawyers? And according to him and other civil servants in the British, whatever then, they said Africans do not have need of technicalities.
Welcome back. I was discussing the last time with Professor Femi Taiwo, and we are continuing the conversation. Professor Femi Taiwo, thank you for coming again and staying with me.
Thanks for having me.
In his book, Professor Ayodele, in tracking the impact of Western education, I can't recall the title of the book, didn't quite speak about this. Was it that he did not recognize the mine that had been put in place, or he thought there was more to the Lugardian agenda anyway than to bother ourselves about that implant?
I don't know why that happened, but I can tell you that as a history graduate, from Ife, when I was working on the book, I practically had to revise myself on a lot of things as I did the research. And I was actually miffed at how much had been left out of our education. And we were taught by the best people.
Is that a contradiction? If we were taught by the best people, why would they leave out the most important elements of learning?
No, they didn't leave out the most important elements of learning. They were just mistaken as to what they thought were the most important things. And that's precisely what good education does. They trained us very well to look at whatever structures they built, and I've now found that the structures were rickety.
These structures, and let's link it back, because you just mentioned the state of Nigerian universities, particularly the intellectual.
Don't call me on that. I will not comment on that.
No, we will move on to looking backwards historically. From the Grecian times, I suppose. What was the original concept of the university system when man, or modern man, decided to invent the university system? What purpose was it to serve?
Well, universities came before modernity. Okay? And they were originally, part of the feudal system. In fact, that's why many universities in Europe, are still run almost like the feudal system. So that's the reason you have one professor in a department. And until that professor dies and moves on, no one else can become a professor. So, and then the professor then calls the shots, is, lord of all that he surveys, and all that. But the idea was, to sequester people so that they do not do anything except explore the life of the mind, and literally blaze new paths, for people. That's why leisure becomes very important. Intellectuals are always parasitic in any society.
How do you mean?
You give us money, you give us comfort to think. So we don't have to worry about our daily bread. So we don't have to pull the plow. We don't have to plow the field. Somebody else does that. But what you expect from us is that we will turn around and look for ways to make the condition of humanity better.
Now, that is the ideal conception of the intellectual. Now, in Nigeria, for instance, in Africa, by extension, has that been the case? The parasitic nature of the intellectual, is it of any benefit to its society?
again, go back to the example of the Nobel Prize winners that I'm talking about, okay? Think of all the great writers throughout history in those societies where the life of the mind is valued. What do you do for writers? You free them up to explore their imagination. What is the direct result for society? Nil. What is the indirect result for society? Priceless. Okay? People read books, people dramatize them, they make movies, they do all those things. All those things have a way of making the human condition less unlivable, of improving social relations. But that was not the main reason they were done. The main reason they were done was we want to tell a good story so that those who read it can enjoy it. And if they enjoy it, somebody probably who was in a very bad mood, that day, and probably will have killed her spouse, might then say, oh, wow, some character in the book, oh, this is my story. Maybe there's another way for me to be able to deal with this. Can you quantify that? No. The problem with our society is we're looking for what we can quantify.
Well, again, because as the economists would say, you're dealing with an issue of comparative advantage. Would you rather deal with more practical things or more ideational things that don't have immediate consequences?
Societies that deal with ideational things have expanding economies. Societies that deal with practical things never expand their economies.
This is worth listening to in more detail.
It's almost paradoxical.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, especially modern society, which I call a knowledge society, knowledge is intangible. Okay? China has become the world's manufacturing center. Okay? Why is China not overtaking the United States economically? Because all the patents, all the ideas that are needed to manufacture all those things, to make the prototypes, are housed in the US. So that's why China is now trying to direct more and more of its GDP to research and development. Which research and development, as Awolowo said in 1987, just before he died, we don't do in Africa at all.
The current structure of the university system in Nigeria.
I won't talk about it.
No, why not? I mean, you were part of it. I know you've not been part of it in the last 2 decades or so, but you were part of it, and there was what you might call the golden era. At least Ife used to be called Great Ife. I'm just go back to that. You were a product of that period in the mid-70s. Recalling those years, what exactly made Ife great, and what is left of that greatness?
I think we need to be realistic. In 1991, 1988 or 89, we had a symposium for that fine gentleman, Mr. Dikpeolu, who was a librarian. And I gave a paper at that workshop on, asking another set of questions. Why do our institutions become so brittle so that at the slightest hint of crisis, they crumble? So why has Ife not remained great? Why has Ibadan not remained great? And I came up with the same answer. Actually, it's one of my most cited papers now. It's called Colonialism and its Aftermath, the Crisis of Knowledge Production. The truth of the matter is that the temperament that we needed to make those institutions become almost impregnable to the buffetings of our crisis, we never had. So that's why, we are now looking back in a young country of 53 years old to a golden age. The game is over. But the truth of the matter is that, the first generation of intellectuals, I told one friend of mine recently, I think a day of reckoning is coming when, especially my generation, will have to talk to those older people about what they failed to do And it is not an accident that many of them have had to spend their twilight years overseas enduring all kinds of insults. Indian scholars did not have to do that. Korean scholars are not doing, Brazilian scholars are not doing that. So what did Nigerian scholars do that made it imperative for them in the twilight of their academic careers to have to go someplace else and play second fiddle in order for them to have a good life?
The University of Ibadan was founded in 1948, as was the University of Ghana and Seoul National University in Korea. When we look at the three, for instance, and a few others in the West Indies, why have some become world class and some not quite grown out of their infancy?
In the case of Africa, I have just one culprit, almost for everything now: military rule.
They seem to be the most flogged culprit. Are we fair to them, knowing, for instance, that in most instances, this military man usually operates with the connivance and assistance of the civil servants and the intellectual elite who write the papers for them, who justify their every action?
So there you have the other wing, of that, the intellectuals, especially in Nigeria. Because Gowon used some intellectuals, and all that, but under Obasanjo and Mohammed, the dam broke. They brought in, all the way down to Babangida and so on and so forth. And I hate to say it, and I've written about this in the lecture that I gave for Professor Layinka in 2002. The more intellectuals associated with government in Nigeria and other public institutions, the faster the quality fell.
That's curious. Because again,
that's an actual statement, so people can check it out.
I mean, it is. I mean, I was asking a similar question of Professor Tam David West many years ago, and because I was worried about this same conclusion, that how come the more the people in institutions of higher learning, knowledgeable people, intellectual, the more they are found in the corridors of power, the worse the case has been for our development. Why?
The question is whether they are knowledgeable. You see, that's what I mean by a PhD does not make you knowledgeable. A PhD makes you knowledgeable in your narrow specialty. It is always an open question for many of us in this part of the world whether while we are getting that PhD, we cut out some education to ourselves, as a byproduct. More often than not, we don't.
Now, is it just a lack of knowledge, or is it a lack of commitment to the good of society?
The knowledge is what will make you be committed to the good of society. Because the knowledge that we're talking about is precisely why you have liberal arts education, humanities, some very serious ideas about human nature, about what is befitting. That is what will make our people think that having a city with open gutters is befitting of their humanity. Okay? There's no country that did not start from where we now are. When I went to Korea, they told me, as recently as the 70s, Seoul was dismissed as a smelly fish city. Seoul, the same Seoul that you're looking at right now. In 40 years, the Koreans have turned that around. When I went there, I did not even know this until I came back and I was reading a Korean economist who teaches at Cambridge University. And he was talking about his growing up in Seoul and how back then, Koreans used to run on KT. You know what KT is?
No.
Korean time.
Like as in African time?
Thank you. When you go to Korea now, you will not get the impression that there was ever a time in Korean history when they did not have the sense of punctuality that now characterizes the whole place.
What brings that about? Is it the intellectual? Is it the political leadership?
The intellectuals and the political leadership. And you must have a right mix of the two.
Yeah, talking about the right mix, which is where the whole conundrum lies. I mean, we've just spoken about the going to bed, literally, of the political elite and the intellectual elite and even the theocratic elite. What have we gotten out of it? The mess we've just been describing.
Yeah, but that's because, you know, the kinds of intellectuals that you have to work with are precisely the kinds of intellectuals that I'm saying are not knowledgeable, do not take knowledge seriously.
Let us look at that within what you might call an African cultural or ideological framework.
Yes.
Because I guess the question always is, who's going to do it for us if we don't get to fix it ourselves? So where is the inspiration likely to come from to get it right? Is it from our history? Did we have a period that we used to do it right before colonialism, intervened? Or was it always in our DNA not to just know how to fix it?
No, I don't want to believe it's in our DNA. But I think we have not taken our history seriously. And because of the the reason why I wrote Africa Must Be Modern is that I got tired of Africans taking off the table what is likely to be the route to their salvation in the immediate period. Because every time I would talk about those things, people would say to me, why do you think we have to be like the West? And my answer was, there are worse ways of being than being like the West. And if you were like the West, you'll not be sitting on open gutters in your city. Okay? So, and every time you run into trouble here, you run to the West. Every time you need a new soccer coach, you go and get, a fourth grade Oyinbo, just because it's Oyinbo. Okay? So, now, when you want to repair your expressway, you gave it to a Nigerian group, they messed up. Now you are going cap in hand to Julius Berger again. The last I looked, Julius Berger is not from Okekpopo. So if you think that everything good comes from them, so why don't you try to play Prometheus with them and steal their fire? That's what India has done. Look at where India is now. That's what Brazil has done. Look at where Brazil is now. That's what South Korea did. In fact, South Korea deliberately set a date for them to become like the West. They were not pussyfooting around. They practically said, we got to be like those people. So when a friend of mine asked me, why do you think the Koreans did that? I said, they got tired of being the world's doormat.
It goes back to what you said.
We are not tired yet of being the world's doormat.
Yeah, perhaps,
I mean, now Dubai is just walking over us. I saw the notice, you're doing some legend stout or something, promotion, and the first prize is free shopping in Dubai.
Yes.
My heart sank.
Okay, is it a validation of Lugard's claim then that Africans are just pussyfooters anyway?
No, it's not. We are doing our best to validate it, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. There are Africans, African intellectuals, I mean, I'm not alone in thinking this. There's a Cameroonian also who wrote an article that I read some time ago saying that Africa should throw out all this nonsense, and let us get on with the rest of the world. Now, does that mean that there will be no problems there? Hell no. But the difference is that because we are going to embrace knowledge, then we're going to stop lying to ourselves. I'll give you just one instance. You know how we lie to ourselves about how we take care of our old people? Okay? I'm sure you know, if it's not in your family, you have many friends who can tell you stories of elderly abuse by many of our own people, many of our friends, colleagues, and so on and so forth. Now, in those societies, because they know that things like that happen, they put safeguards in place, welfare systems, inspection systems, so that those old people can be taken away from their children who are abusing them, become wards of the state. It does not mean that they don't get abused in those homes and so on and so forth, but at least somebody is being held responsible for them. But because we are so adept at denying, so we say, oh, we're Africans, we take care of our old people. Hello? You know many old people now who have no one taking care of them. and there are no options for them.
Some would say that's a consequence of the train you are asking us to join, modernity.
There's no way around it, because your alternative is, how do you get Ibadan back to being a village?
So let's talk.
How do you get Ilesha back to being a... You can't even get Moniya back to being a village.
But, you know, I still want to stay, you know, and the reason I want to stay, of course, is because you're a university professor, and that's, you live the life of the mind.
I try to.
You try to. And you've indicated, and I agree, that that is supposed to be the institution that puts the torch to our light, or the light to our torch. And if it's not working, we must find a way of making it work. And even if borrowing ideas from other places, as you've indicated. Between the U.S. university ownership system and the Nigerian university ownership system, what are the marked differences, and what can we borrow from the American system to improve on the Nigerian system?
The U.S. lies to itself about how much the market runs everything. We all know that under capitalism, it is not true that the market runs everything. But education is one area where it is very close to the truth. It is an open market. There is a school in the US called DeVry Institute. DeVry Institute was set up as a profit-making, teaching people. It was a vocational, you know, institution. Over the years, you know, DeVry has turned itself into a university, complete with a graduate school of management and all that. Did I hear of any executive director telling them, no, you cannot do that? Hell no. Did I hear of any executive director saying that they must have so many acres of land, you know, build a vice chancellor's lodge, council chambers before? Hell no. Now, do people think that the degrees from DeVry are useless degrees? Hell no. Because when you get your degree from DeVry and you get your degree from University of Chicago, you apply for jobs. They will look at your whatever it is. If it looks like what they're looking for, yes, they will invite you for, you know, test and interview. If you are from DeVry and you are able to beat the rear of the guy from Chicago, you're on your way. Okay? Now, if you have a system like we do, where you have one place, which of course in a federal system is, as far as I'm concerned, illegal, controlling everything, then it means that the system is as good as who is controlling it.
You're speaking of the National Universities Commission, I suppose, and that is the centralized chief regulator of university education in Nigeria. Why do you think we do not need the NUC to regulate between the university system, especially since we have federal, state, and private universities?
What is it regulating?
The curriculum, the standards,
Those are precisely the things that mark a university. The communist systems did it and they all collapsed. Why should we go their way?
You said it's illegal, by the way. It's a properly constituted body that has been in existence for quite a while.
I think it's only because people have not tested the legality of its status. It is a relic of military rule. Education is on the concurrent list. And if, you know, there is a conflict between the state and the federal, you know, on any item concerning the concurrent list, that issue will not be determined by the federal. It will be determined by the Supreme Court of Nigeria. That's the way the Constitution is supposed to operate. So the federal government cannot lay down the law in an area where it shares jurisdiction, you know. And then it gets, in fact, part of what amazes me is how you establish a state university and put it under federal control in a truly federal system.
But we all know we are not operating a truly federal system.
People then need to take very seriously, you know, the future of their children, the commitment to quality education, and begin to fight those structures because they are not working for the Nigerian people.
What example do you have to support this claim that the NUC, for instance, is not working or is not up to scratch in its avowed objectives?
That's why I said I wouldn't comment on the university system in Nigeria, because I'm out of it.
No, you are a good enough observer.
Yeah, but I don't want to appear, there might be a new imperialism developing of diasporic Nigerians, coming down and talking as if they know everything about what is going on in the country. I've been out of it for 20-something years, so
well,
there goes it.
We'll let that be then. But since you are you mentioned sometime before in this conversation about the need to test the laws by challenging and deepening our democracy,
absolutely,
for the practice of federalism.
Because democracy is not about harmony.
How do you mean?
Democracy is about conflict.
As they will say.
The fundamental philosophical underpinning of liberal democracy is that human beings, and this is the basis of modernity, human beings are infinitely variable. Each person is unique. So there's no consensus to start with. Whatever consensus is going to emerge has to be negotiated, because you have your likes, I have my like, you have your dislikes, I have my dislikes, and we have to operate together. We got to put those things on the table. That's why we have a neutral umpire in the court system to determine when I have imposed on your space and when you have imposed on my space. And the presidential system of government that we are running in America, where we borrowed it from, those who thought it up originally designed the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary to be three separate emporia. And they designed them for each jealously, fiercely, to guard its prerogative, its area. So they were designed to conflict with one another.
We'll come back and conclude on why Africa must be modern. But we have to close now. Professor Femi Taiwo, thank you for being here.
It's been good being here. Thank you very much.
One more time and conclude, especially explain why Africa must be modern. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Professor Femi Taiwo of the Cornell University in the USA. We'll be back to conclude this conversation. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Let's extrapolate this or expand this conversation to the whole issue of federalism in Nigeria. And at one breath, everybody or most people, most states are complaining about the overbearing nature of the central government. On the other hand, some people say that's what's best for Nigeria at this point. We're too fragile a nation to have a weak center. How much of oppositional politics do we need at this stage when, as some say, we're a fragile nation in need of coming together to protect one another?